Denzel Washington destroyed his own career. At least, that's how it looked. Sudden decisions, turning down massive projects, cutting ties with major studios, walking away from multi-million-dollar paychecks. And instead, he poured his own money into a film no one wanted to make. Even his closest friends didn't understand. This is career suicide, they told him. But he didn't listen. He was fighting against those who wanted this story buried forever. Years ago, this script was called too provocative, too dangerous, not fit for reality. 20 years ago, a studio bought it, just to lock it away. This isn't a film people are ready for, they told him. And back then, he had no choice but to agree. But now, things were different. Now, he decided what stories would be told. Stories that someone had tried to erase. He pulled this script out of the shadows. And that was why they were trying to stop him. No one understood why he was so stubborn. No one saw that this wasn't just another role. This was his fight. And he wasn't going to lose. A dusty old bookstore on the outskirts of New York. The air smelled of forgotten pages and time. Aging bookshelves lined the walls, barely holding themselves together. The owner, an elderly woman with deep-lined wrinkles, rarely saw new customers. But she had never forgotten him. A tall, quiet kid who had spent years walking into her store. He never asked for bestsellers. Never bought popular novels. He always searched for the same book. A softcover. Its pages worn. A screenplay. This was long before Denzel Washington became a star. Back when he was just a young man in a cheap suit who believed that film could change the world. He had found the script by accident. The author's name was unknown. The story had been abandoned. But the plot, it cut straight to the bone. A story about a man who saw the truth but lived in a world that refused to acknowledge it. Denzel had read it on an old mattress in a rented room, turning the pages as night became morning. Back then, he had no idea that this story would become his greatest battle. He only knew one thing, he couldn't stop reading it, imagining it on a screen, imagining a world willing to hear it. But the world wasn't ready. It was easier that way. They didn't want this story to exist. Years passed. Denzel took on roles, became a household name, won awards. But one day, while going through old boxes in his personal archive, he found those same pages again, and everything came flooding back. The injustice. The pain of knowing this story had been silenced. This time, he wouldn't back down. He returned to the same bookstore. But the script was gone. The elderly woman recognized him instantly. She knew what he was looking for. "That book isn't for sale anymore," she told him. "Was it ever?" He smiled. She studied him, her gaze heavy with time. "Once," she said. "But not all stories are meant to be told." Denzel nodded. But he knew she was wrong. All stories can be told. You just have to be willing to pay the price. He started working on the film that very night. No studio approval. No Hollywood funding. No rules but his own. He would make this film, even if it meant risking everything. The night of the premiere, Denzel Washington sat alone in the darkened theater. The film hadn't started yet, but he knew this was the moment of truth. He had put everything on the line. His career, his connections, his money, his reputation, all for one thing: to bring a story to life that someone had tried to erase. From the moment he started, he knew there would be resistance. This story had been buried for too long, and the same people who controlled Hollywood then still controlled it now. They didn't want this film to see the light of day. The attacks came immediately. Production companies refused to rent equipment. Actors who had signed on mysteriously lost other contracts. Financiers, once his friends, stopped returning his calls. He knew this wasn't coincidence. They were trying to stop him, but they didn't understand one thing. Denzel Washington wasn't the kind of man you could stop. He sold properties. He put up his own money. He bet everything he had just to get this film made. They told him it was career suicide, that he'd never work in Hollywood again, that he was throwing everything away. He didn't hesitate, because he wouldn't let this story die twice. Now, in this silent theater, he waited. First scene, first frame. The audience held its breath. And for the first time, Denzel understood something. He had done the right thing, even if he had to pay the price. It was worth it. The forgotten book. A dusty manuscript in a public library. Not a conspiracy theory. Not a work of fiction, but a collection of facts. Facts that were never meant to be found. Someone had written it, a former government insider. A man who had seen the truth from the inside. He had spent decades gathering evidence. And when he realized they were hunting him, he fled, leaving only one copy behind, in a random library, hoping someone would find it. The odds were impossible. But somehow, it worked. The book pointed to a pattern hidden in everyday statistics. For the last 20 years, people consumed twice as many calories, yet their work productivity had declined. Depression rates skyrocketed. Fewer people read books. Interest in politics had collapsed. At first, it seemed random, just numbers. But once you understood the cause, it became the biggest secret of all. Washington held his breath. The screen flickered. The camera moved through dark government hallways. Folders on desks. Reports. Hundreds of pages of research. And all of them proved one thing. The food in supermarkets wasn't just unhealthy. It was designed that way. Big business and the government had been working together for years, pushing people toward overconsumption, filling food with chemicals that created addiction, dulling critical thinking, keeping the population in a constant state of apathy. The more people consumed, the weaker they became. Fewer questions, fewer protests, less resistance. And while the people became slower, sicker, and more passive, the rich got richer. Insurance companies made billions treating unexpected diseases. Pharmaceutical corporations profited from the epidemic of diabetes, heart disease, and depression. And the government? It got exactly what it wanted. A quiet, obedient population, too tired to fight back. The danger Denzel Washington faced was nothing compared to what was at stake. He had a chance to wake up millions, to save his country, and he took it.